They were performing incessantly. They had heavy guards wherever they went. And when they went to the Philippines, they barely escaped with their lives after they had offended President Marcos by not turning up at one of his receptions. And Imelda Marcos was outraged at the way the Beatles had ignored her, so they decided they didn't want to tour again. They were fed up. They really wanted to lead something of a normal life.
I remember we all used to run in the back of these big vans they'd hired. And this one was like a silver-lined van, a chromium, nothing in it, like a furniture van, like with nothing in it, just chrome. And we were all piled into this after this really miserable gig. And I said, right, that's it.
No, we were absolutely fed up with touring. And why we were fed up with touring, because we were turning into such bad musicians. Because the volume of the audience was always greater than the volume of the band. And I mean, just for me personally, on stage, I mean, there was no chance in hell I could do a fill because it would just disappear. So I ended up just hanging on to the offbeats and watching the other guys' bums and trying to lip read to see where we were, you know.
It sounds marvellous, being a multimillionaire pop star, having the whole world at your feet, girls screaming wherever you go. In actual fact, it's hell.
And that was happening wherever we went, even in India. You know, we went to India from the Philippines. I planned to go there to buy a sitar, actually. I was thinking, well, at least this is going to be one place where we can have a bit of peace. And when we got off the plane, there was all these Indian faces in the night, all shouting, Beatles, Beatles.
Paul went to Kenya and went on a safari trip, as I remember. And John had already been booked by Richard Lester in a part in How I Won the War. So he went off to Spain to film. And Ringo joined him there for a while, just to hang around with him. George went to India and worked with Ravi Shankar.
There was no question of disbanding at that point. It was just, we got to get off this road.
And at that time, a lot of other things were changing. Society was changing. The sort of psychedelic era was coming in. And we were very much part of that. And I think we really felt that it could be done better from a record than from anything else. The record could go on tour, was the theory.
I think Paul made the phone call. Paul always made the phone call, let's go back to the studio, lads. And I used to terrify John and I because we'd be in the garden. And Paul would want us to work all the time because he's the workaholic.
We were in this big white room that was very dirty. It hadn't been painted for years and years. And it had all this old sound baffles hanging down that was all dirty and broken. Not a very nice atmosphere. When you think of the songs that were made in that studio, number 2, it's amazing because there was no atmosphere in there. We had to kind of just make the atmosphere ourselves.
You know, the great thing about these studios in Abbey Road was that you're always bumping into people. So Malcolm Sargent would look in at the session and sort of wave in his pinstripe suit and his carnation. Hello, boys. And George would say, so Malcolm would like to say hello. Hello, Mal. Hello, boys. It was all very that. I remember seeing Sir Tyrone Guthrie on the steps here, you know, the great man himself, you know. So it was always very like that.
It was a joke, really. I mean, they had this toilet paper like lino that had EMI on every piece. And they had the refrigerator had a padlock on it. So if you wanted a cup of tea, we'd have to break open the padlock on the fridge to get the milk out.
EMI being this huge monster company, you know, when they bought the 8-track, the first 8-track in England, you know, they're so cheap, they didn't buy the plug to plug it in.
It was going to be boring to just make another Beatles album. And we'd stopped touring. We now had this huge liberated opportunity. We could do anything we wanted. I went on a trip to America and came back and had this idea on the plane. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It was all very Uncle Joe's Medicine Show with dancing bears in the sky of diamonds. I showed up at John's house one day and he said to me, look at this great drawing Julian's just done. And he showed me, I remember it very well. It was a kid's drawing, and kids always have people floating around like Chagall does in all his things. They're always just floating. I think it's just something to do with the kids don't realize people have to be put on the ground.
I've seen the painting that this little kid does. I don't know if you've got kids, you know, but they just slap paint everywhere and say it's a painting. And of course, we put them in frames and put them on the wall. And and it was just this crazy little kid's painting. And what is that?
John had said, "What's it called then?" And Julian had said, "Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds," you know, as you do with kids. And John went, ding.
They were able to conjure up a wonderfully evocative image with very sparse material. And the opening to Lucy is a really case in point. And it's a most wonderful phrase. I think, you know, if Beethoven had been around, he wouldn't have minded one of those. And over that very, very simple and beautiful phrase, John sang just one note. He developed it. I mean, he had a way of finding out what he wanted to sing, even as we were recording. But to begin with, all he sang was, "Picture yourself on a boat on a river." Notice the tape echo on the voice already, even though this is a very early rehearsal take.
It was a very friendly competition because we were both going to share in the rewards anyway. But it really helped step. So we were getting better and better and better all the time.
John and Paul always wrote a song for Ringo in every album. With a little help, My Friends proved to be the song. And Paul wrote that song and wrote it beautifully, simply, with just 5 notes that Ringo had to carry, all within one little phrase which was... all in those notes. Terribly simple, terribly effective.
Would you stand up and throw tomatoes at me, or would you throw tomatoes at me? And I would not sing that line, tomatoes at me, because I hated the line anyway. And in those days, they used to throw all sorts of stuff at us on stage. And I didn't want this to become a habit either. And I just hated the line, so I refused to sing that line, tomatoes. So they changed it, would you stand up and walk out on me?
Do you need anybody? I need somebody to love.
Besides changing that line, it took a lot of coaxing from Paul to get me to sing that last note. I just felt it was very high. I always worry about the vocals, you know, and I'm insecure when I do the vocals. I still am, and I was then. And so he would, you know, get me up, and we finally got that last note.
From my friend.
The role of a producer had changed over the years. I mean, when we started in 1962, my job was really an organizer, to get them into some kind of shape, make sure they were tidy in the studio, musically, I mean. And gradually that changed. By the time Pepper had come along, I suppose I was a realizer of their ideas. So that if John wanted something really weird, I had to try and provide it for him. Or if Paul wanted some extraordinary orchestration, I had to try and find out what he wanted.
What I think his great skill then was to allow us to do what we wanted. So his role changed from really deciding what was done to allowing us to do it.
I think the role with George became easier because at first he was like, to us, we were kind of frightened because we were just nervous kids, and he was like this big school teacher sort of person who we had to find and have a relationship with.
George was like the big...
I never thought our meeting would cause such an explosion.
I'd heard the name of Ravi Shankar, must have been around 1965, maybe 1966. The third time I heard this name, I went out and bought the record. It was strange because intellectually I didn't know what it was. It didn't make any sense to me, but somewhere inside of me, it made absolute sense. It made more sense than anything I'd ever heard before.
Indians were already giving us. It started out by being George working with a Dilruba player, which is a kind of Indian violin. And then I had to copy that with a bank of English violinists. Here we had the Dilrubas on 2, and our English instruments joining in on track 3, but George answering on sitar. Here it is. and pizzicato strings accompanying him. Bit of slurpy cello. Doing the same thing as the Dilruba. And here he is singing the same tune as the Dilruba in exactly the same way, the same kind of swoops that the Dilruba does. You hear his voice, you hear the Dilruba.
And lose the soul. Within You, Without You was just my way of trying to make a Western pop song using some of those instruments and some of those sounds.
We all knew George liked Indian music, and there was a kind of tolerance.
It didn't seem too much of a stretch for us to get further out than they'd got. We always loved the Morton Fraser harmonica gang. When we were kids, it was a little TV thing where a little bloke came on and they all pushed him out the way. But it was those giant big bass, ho, 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 ho. And John used to play harmonica, so we always liked that. But when I heard them on Pet Sounds, there's a lot of harmonica, bass harmonica. He uses that. It's the instruments he uses and the way he places them against each other. It's very cleverly done. It's a really clever album. So we were inspired by it, you know, and nicked a few ideas.
Celebrated Mr. K performs his feat on Saturday at Bishopsgate.
I remember we walked into an antique shop in Sevenoaks in Kent, and we were looking at what they had there, and John pulled out this thing that he found, which was said, The Benefit of Mr. Kite, and it was virtually all the lyrics to that song.
When I saw it, it was hanging up in the hall of his house in Surrey. And it had everything that the song has on it. It had the Henderson Twins and Pablo Fanke's Fair, and all those words were written on the poster. And he thought, it obviously inspired him to write a song about a fairground or circus.
That's how you do it. You know, you get ideas, you hear people say stuff, or so you hear a phrase that sounds good and you write it down and remember it. So I think he was just advanced for those days in his awareness of everything could be put into a song, you know.
He wanted to create a sound picture of what the song was all about. And he actually said to me, I want to smell the sawdust. But to get the smell of the sawdust, John and I, both sat on different organs, Wurlitzers and Lowrys and Hammonds, and with double speed techniques created a kind of whirly atmosphere. And the backing, I had visions of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, who had a little pipey organ in their hut. John thought slightly differently. He thought of Magic Roundabout, but it was a tooty kind of sound that we were able to create. And together with that, we had this weird and wonderful tape consisting of all little sections of real steam organs, cut up, joined together in a very haphazard manner, some back to front, to give us no tune at all, but just a noise that would convey what we wanted. And this is what it is.
The band begins at 10 to 6 when Mr. K performs his tricks without a
Double track vocal from John.
And Mr. H will demonstrate 10 Somersets he'll undertake.
Ringo on his cymbals.
There's in preparation a splendid time has gathered.
I mean, when I first met them, they really couldn't write a decent song. Love Me Do was the best they could give me. They blossomed as songwriters in a way that is breathtaking.
It had an amazing effect on the way people saw records. I mean, people suddenly thought, oh, well, you can do that? Well, they've done it, so of course you can do it. So I suppose it made, it opened a door and showed everybody that there was another room, and that you could all play around in that other room, and actually it could still be called a commercial record.
Good morning, the best to you each morning. Sunshine, breakfast, morning full of sun.
Ah, Good Morning. Well, Good Morning, of course, was inspired by a commercial, a breakfast commercial. And I suppose that triggered something in John, which made him write the song. And again, he drew his inspiration from very mundane, ordinary things like Time for Tea and Meet the Wife. Meet the Wife was a television serial. It kind of indicates the suburbanarity of his songs and the very Englishness of the whole thing. Good Morning was typical of him, that it was of odd meters, but sounded perfectly natural. I mean, he would have a 3/4 bar, 4/4 bar, 5/4 bar, even without knowing it. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. It was to be a very hard driving, punchy thing. The tune itself was quite simple. But it was full of accents all over the place. John wanted to finish this song with a collection of animal noises, starting off with a cock, identifying with a Kellogg's commercial, and then each animal was capable of either devouring or frightening the one before it. And we had a whole string of them here.
And put on, overdub like the hi-hat, or if there's, listening again, there's lots of conga drums. I'm not a percussionist, that's another field of drums, but I'm on playing the congas, and there's lots of maracas, and all that stuff sort of came on at the end. So there was a lot of huge gaps. The biggest memory I have of Sgt. Pepper is I learned to play chess on it.
We were changing our method of working at that time, and instead of now looking for catchy singles, it was now to do more. It was more like writing your novel, the Sgt. Pepper thing, for me, definitely. It was much more a kind of overall concept. Wow, and you can
happen straight away was that it was very mysterious. I mean, it was like a game. There were quizzes to see if you could spot who everyone was, and of course nobody could. And I think a kind of cult built up around it, and then the myths and stories that built up around it. It became an interesting talking point, I think.
I think we just thought we'll do the best we can in this very far-out new way that we had of thinking. Get it to be something. I still think that is the best philosophy, is to really try and please yourself.
Probably the most momentous song on the album, A Day in the Life, began in a very simple way. And we've got the rehearsal take one, the very first time we heard it, with John giving a few instructions to people, as usual, just before he starts it. We connected them with a series of empty bars on either side of Paul's section before we came back into John's as a reprise. And we knew we had to fill those bars with something sensational. And we didn't know what it was going to be yet. And in order to keep the 24 bars so that everybody knew when to come back in again, dear old Mal Evans stood by the piano counting the bars.
7, 8, 9, 10.
And just to add further weight to it, he set off an alarm clock at the end of it to trick everybody back into it again. They told me they wanted an orchestral climax to fill these empty bars, a giant orgasm of sound, rising from nothing at all to the most incredible noise. And this is what we came up with.
The concept of the thing. I mean, before concept albums became a dirty word, you'd put it on and sit down and say, oh, well, for the next 50 minutes, I'm going to be going there. So it was very new from that point of view.
It was the time, the attitude, it was the concept, the world was trying to change, it didn't quite make it, but it made a small move. It was in the air. I mean, for me, those psychedelic years were the most exciting.
It's like a period, if you listen to music from the 20s or the 30s, it has a sort of sound to it, and I think, that's important. If you want to listen to you know, something like a Hoagie Carmichael tune. Well, it's partly the song that you like, and it's partly the way he did it, and it's also partly the way it was recorded, how the microphones sounded in those days, how the tube amplifiers in the boards. You know, it's all that kind of atmosphere, and it becomes a little period piece.
I must confess that when we were going through Pepper, people were saying, how's it coming along? I said, fine, you know. And I must confess that as we were getting longer and longer into the album, and more avant-garde, I was wondering whether we were being a little bit over the top and a little bit maybe pretentious. Just a slight niggle of worry. I thought, well, is the public ready for this yet?
The musical papers, which you used to read, were started to slag us off because we hadn't done anything, because it took 5 months to record. And I remember with great glee seeing in one of the papers, oh, the Beatles have dried up. There's nothing coming from them. They've been in the studio, they can't think what they're doing. And I was sort of sitting rubbing my hands saying, you just wait.
Nothing to do to save the day. Good morning. Going to work, you want to go, feeling low down. Having a home, you start to roam, then you're in town. Everybody knows there's nothing doing, everything is closed, it's like a ruin. Everyone you see is fast asleep, and you're on your own, you're in the street.
These are the animal effects for Good Morning, Good Morning, and it's RM20.
RS7.
RS5.
Was ist los haben hier?
Check 8.
Was ist going?